This is TWiT.
T-Mobile, AT&T, and Sprint are selling our real-time location data, and it's ending up in the hands of bounty hunters who can easily geolocate our phones and therefore us. Journalist Joseph Cox knows this to be true because he paid a bounty hunter to do it. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the basics first. What kind of location information do our cell phone providers have, and why do they have it?
So the way your phone works, it's constantly ringing out to cell phone towers by it. This is just how phones work. They need that to route text messages, route phone calls, and in virtue of that, it does give an approximate location. In our case, it was something like 500 meters, the radius of the circle. The telcos obviously take that data, but what they then do is actually store it and sell it to third parties. And that eventually trickles down to, as you said, these bounty hunters and me. And I clearly shouldn't be able to buy this data.
Okay, bounty hunters, right off the bat, like my ears perk up, and I'm like, wow, it sounds really tough. What does a bounty hunter need for this location, and how are they being hired? What are they being hired for?
Right. It's not law enforcement, and that's why it jumps out, right? We've had a similar issue last year when the New York Times and Ron Wyden found a similar company, but that was to like low-level cops or prison staff without a warrant. This is private businesses and bounty hunters. They will use it to track down fugitives, find people who have skipped their bail. And they will, of course, argue that that is a legitimate purpose. But other people are going to disagree because there isn't consent necessarily being done there. When the telcos sell this data and the middleman companies, they say the target, for lack of a better word, must consent. That's not what's happening here. When we sent the location request and we geolocated someone's phone in Queens, New York to a specific area, there was no warning on the phone. There was no text message. There was no, hey, do you consent to this? So even though there may be legitimate purposes, and there are some other ones as well, there's wide room for abuse here.
So is anyone actually breaking the law here, or is it all just in those pages and pages of things we agree to without reading? We are sort of giving our consent.
Yeah, that's the thing. You would feel that selling the location data of 100 millions of Americans, which is some of the most sensitive data possible, would not be legally above board. But of course, the US doesn't have great data protection legislation, if at all. There may be some breach of laws in repurposing the data, and I suppose it depends then what you go do with it. But the actual selling and trading of it is not an issue in the United States.
I feel like right now there's so many. We're hearing so much about privacy. Obviously, location data is a big topic that we've seen recurring through last year. A lot of the times it seems to involve that company called Facebook that we've may or may not have heard of before. This story, a lot of what's going on right here is in many ways just as kind of icky to a certain degree as a lot of the stuff that we're hearing from Facebook. Yet I feel like to a certain degree, a story like this isn't going to have the legs as if it had Facebook in the title. Why is that? What does that say about the public, about the media's kind of attention to actual privacy issues right now?
Yeah, when we think of privacy issues, you're right. We think of Facebook or maybe Google, and then maybe a few other companies as well. And these are, of course, the Silicon Valley tech companies, maybe Uber as well, when they had that data breach recently. And there is a cultural shift. I think maybe that's too grandiose a term, but people do care about privacy. The Cambridge Analytica story, people really, really followed that. But when it comes to the telcos, these are, even though everybody has a mobile phone, these are obscure companies to most people. People don't really know how phones work, like in a technical sense. They don't really know what happens to that data. So maybe it will have legs, and I agree with you, this will probably peter down as well. But we've been kept in the dark, not only as consumers, but policymakers as well, who are learning about this now. We've never really known what the telcos do with this data in any sort of detail. I think that's been like sort of the lack of movement in this area for at least some time, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's infuriating to me because with Facebook or Google, you can at least say like, oh, well, we're getting a free service. But I get an enormous bill for internet service and cell phone service every month. And on top of that, they're selling my location. It seems very wrong.
Right. Yes, like, of course, a T-Mobile bill, just for sake of example, will be $75. Of course, you pay that. And then the telco is making more money by selling your data onto, obviously, these location aggregators, as they call them. I don't know how much money they actually make from that. As in, is it a side business or a primary part of the business or whatever it may be? But one source who's followed the industry for a while said, well, as long as there's money to make, they're still going to be selling the data. And of course, the telcos have said they are going to stop, but they haven't done that yet, clearly, because we bought this data in a few weeks into December.
Now, Microbill, you talk a little bit about Microbill in your article. They actually removed some pretty relevant documents from their site while you were working on the story. What was removed? What does that say? Like, how does that change things, if at all?
Yeah, so when I first reached out to Microbill, and this is the company that it comes after the telcos, after location aggregators, and then you have Microbill underneath that then sells to the bounty hunter companies in this really complex supply chain. When I first approached them for comment, they just said, please give us that phone number so we can look into it. We're not interested in an individual case of abuse or helping them police their own network. We're interested in exploring this systemic problem. So obviously we declined to provide the phone number. As for the documents, the one I found them removing in particular was a brochure that laid out their mobile device verified product. And this was like pretty interesting, saying explicitly what it's for chasing people who have skipped bail or whatever, and saying just sort of like technical details of how it actually works and that sort of thing. And I didn't think it was that particularly sensitive, because if you're tracking mobile phones, it's quite clear how it's going to work, but they felt compelled to remove it anyway.
So they're they're selling all of this data, maybe like legitimately. I mean, it seems illegitimately, but what about how secure are they keeping it? Like, what about people that might just find this? Is this information on the deep web, or is it easy to access a person's location just from their phone number by not even having to buy this?
So, as for the buying bit, first of all, I should clarify is like it's mostly traded through like word of mouth networks. I only bought it because I had a source who then had a source who then had access in this sort of network of bounty hunters. As for whether they're secure or not, I don't have any specific information on Microbill being secure or unsecure, but another company, the one that the New York Times covered last year along with Ron Wyden, called Securus, they were the ones giving location data to law enforcement without a warrant. A few days, maybe a week after that, a hacker actually contacted me, and they'd hacked Securus, and they'd stolen thousands of login details. So maybe they could be representative of the industry. There was another company as well that was exposing the live data they were collecting on all the phones, and you could just go to their website and look up the location of any phone if you just knew how to interact with the website in a particular way. So there's at least two companies in this space which have seriously mishandled data. So I would not be surprised if others in the space aren't so serious about it either.
And then you're right, as far as at least here in the U.S., 3 major networks, Verizon is seemingly absent from the list. Is this just because Verizon chooses not to sell this data, or is Verizon doing something else differently from the other 3 carriers that would kind of prevent these kind of middlemen from having access or providing access?
Yeah, so Verizon's been difficult. In the New York Times Securus story, I believe they were involved. The first time we covered a bounty hunter company, which actually shut down, I think, in 2014, 2015, Verizon was selling to them as well. Verizon aren't responding to my emails, so, that'd be great if you want to actually have a call about it. But from what I understand, they dealt with similar issues last year. And I'm not exactly sure how they mitigated it or dealt with it, but it seems they have done something potentially more than the other carriers. The short answer is we don't exactly know Verizon's involvement, but it's not like they're going to be totally exempt from selling this data. I'm sure they sell it to the more legitimate ones, such as roadside assistance, when you have to find a stranded driver, or emergency response and that sort of thing, because there's going to be a lot of phones on the Verizon network that need that capability as well. I'm just not sure if they do the bounty hunter stuff.
Sure.
So what has been the response to your piece so far? I know Wyden has been involved. Tell us a little bit about what's happened since you posted this.
Yeah, so Wyden is proposing a privacy bill that would do this sort of thing. And of course, it's not my place to have to say that would be a good or a bad thing, but that's, of course, the reason that he's interested in the story. There was also Senator Mark Warner, Harris as well. So several senators are calling for that. And also the commissioner to the FCC is saying that the FCC needs to investigate. With the government shutdown, it's not clear when that's actually going to happen. But maybe when it reopens, maybe there'll be an FCC investigation at some point. But again, this isn't the first time this sort of issue has come up with the telcos selling the data, but we'll see if it actually results in any sort of movement on their side or in the location aggregator side or in legislation. Because this is it's a legislation issue. It's not really a technical issue. The telcos, they need to be told, if this is what legislation wants to do, to not sell that data in the first place or to severely restrict it. It's not really a technical issue. It's a legal one.
And I mean, there's so much money behind data. Obviously, these companies are making gobs and gobs of money from selling data. So to tell the telcos, to basically eliminate that kind of flow of cash to their bottom line, that would be pretty significant, I have to imagine. And I just want to point out, just real quick, it's not a question or anything. I just want to say that I really appreciated. There was Thomas Rid, the professor at Johns Hopkins University, made the comparison to Blade Runner, which is absolutely appropriate when you consider the subject matter of this news. So
aside from taking our iPhones and putting them in the microwave and for 10 minutes and getting rid of phones,
I do that every morning.
What is there anything we can do? I'm not hardcore enough to not have a cell phone. Is there anything consumers can do to stay more private?
It's hard. Because this isn't like delete your Facebook account, which is already difficult enough when everybody's friends and family is on Facebook anyway. This is even a harder problem because realistically, not many people can live without a phone, right? So, I mean, technically you could put it on airplane mode, I guess, which should block the communications. You could perhaps not take your phone where you go to somewhere that you worry about, maybe a psychiatrist or an abortion clinic or whatever it may be. And I suppose it is also worth bearing in mind that even though the data of T-Mobile, AT&T, Sprint users is available, that does not necessarily mean it's going to be accessed by someone. It's going to depend on your so-called threat model, which is, different for everybody. But if you're still concerned about that, you can maybe leave your phone at home or something like that. But again, ultimately, it's going to come down to a data protection legislation issue. Like we have in Europe with GDPR, that is where actual change will impact that.
It's interesting. No one ever makes their New Year's resolution like cleaning up their threat model. Seems like
they should do. That'd be great.
Yeah, no kidding.
Really, that's my New Year's resolution because I've already given up the ones that I
that you already started.
Yeah,
it's only 10 days into January, Megan. It's never too late.
Joseph Cox is a reporter for Motherboard. He focuses on hackers, crime, and technology. You can read all about his story, how he paid the bounty hunter, how quick he was able to find the phone, and so much more writing. And he can also be found at Joseph F. Cox on Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your work. Thank you for joining us.